to the consciousness of your mind all that I've done for you my whole life? After all, it was for you. Would you commune with that reality? Verse 25. And after the same manner also, the same way, he took the cup after supper. That's why we say it's the third cup, because the meal was eaten, the Passover meal. Said, this cup is the new covenant. Diatheke is always translated covenant, except maybe one place in Hebrews 9 it should be translated another way, but with that one exception, it's covenant. This is the new covenant or the new promise in my blood. This do, or do this. Do this. As often as you drink it in remembrance of me. Now here he takes the cup and he says, this represents the new covenant in my blood. The old covenant was ratified by the blood of what? Animals. The new covenant is ratified by the blood of Christ. You know, when you sign a document, you ratify it. The president signs a law and it goes into effect. When somebody sends you a policy of insurance or some legal papers or a bill of sale for a house or whatever it is, you take a pen and ink and with fluid, with ink, you ratify the promise. They promise to give you a product and you promise to give them money or whatever. They promise in an insurance policy to give you protection and you promise to pay them what that protection costs. There is a covenant ratified by fluid, by ink. In the Old Testament, God said to Israel, I will lead you to the promised land. I will pass over your house and not execute your firstborn if you will sign on the dotted line. And what did they sign with? The blood of a lamb on the doorpost and the lintel. And that was the fluid that ratified the promise. God, you do your part, we will do our part. And throughout all of the Old Testament, God continued to say, you've got to ratify the promise in blood. And they sacrificed animal after animal after animal after animal so that the blood flowed through the land of Israel through all of its history. As the people continued to renew the promise over and over and over and over again. And in fact, when covenants were made in the East, in the ancient East, they weren't made by signing your name at the bottom. An animal was killed and the blood was sprinkled on both parties. You were both doused in blood. As a sign you were going to keep your promise. Covenant ratified by blood. Jesus says there's a new covenant. God is making a new promise. You know what that promise is? It isn't anymore the old one of law. It isn't anymore the old one of you have to do this sacrifice and this sacrifice and this one. It's a brand new promise. Here it is. I will forgive all your sins for all time. And that was new. They had to make sacrifices continuously. I will make one sacrifice forever, and that will be Christ. And His one sacrifice and His one ratification by blood will end the sacrificial system for good. That's a new promise. God says, I'll give you total forgiveness forever. I'll give you eternal life forever by the blood of Christ. And it was as if on the cross, Jesus was taking His blood and signing on the dotted line. That's the new covenant. The blood of Christ. Not the blood of a lamb on a doorpost, where God says, I'll take you out of the land and get you to the promised land. That's temporal and impermanent. But the blood of the new covenant, where God says, I'll take you into heaven and I'll forgive your sin forever unconditionally because of Jesus Christ. That's the new covenant. And so he says the cup represents the new covenant. No longer do you need to go back to the blood of the Passover. Come back to the blood of the cross. The Hebrews, of course, repeatedly shed that blood. Repeatedly, over and over and over and over. And constantly we're saying, I'm sorry, God, I bind myself again to your promise. I've sinned again. Please forgive me again. Here's my sacrifice again. I want to obey again, etc., etc. But once do we come in the name of the blood of Jesus Christ and bind ourselves to the promise. But you know something? Every time after that throughout our lives that we celebrate the Lord's table, we are restating that promise, aren't we? We're taking the cup and we're saying, I outwardly renew my pledge, my part of the salvation bargain. You say, what's my part? God says, I'll save you. I'll give you eternal life. I'll forgive your sins forever if you will do one thing. What is it? Believe. When you take the cup, you're saying, I believe. I renew that commitment. I refresh that vow. I restate that pledge. And Jesus said, do that, would you? Say, how often? Often. As often as you drink it. Well, how often should I drink it? Verse 26. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you show the Lord's death till he come. I'll tell you how often you do it. How often would you like to proclaim the death of Christ? How often would you like to declare his death? How often do you want to commune with his death? How often do you want to restate that pledge? That's how often. And when you do it, would you call my death into mind? Would you remember me in the fullness of what that remembrance means? Call my death into mind. Now you'll notice that it's not just a communion, but it's a proclamation in verse 26. You're showing the Lord's death to the world. You're proclaiming it. The world looks at the communion and says, what are they saying? And somebody says, well, that's how they celebrate Jesus' death. That's right. And we proclaim it and proclaim it and proclaim it to the world. It's also, as I said earlier, eschatological, till he come, it says in 26. It keeps us looking forward to the day when we do it with him. So it isn't a simple thing to come to the table. We remember what Christ has done. And then we call him into conscious presence, and we refresh our covenant and commitment with him. We commune with the living Lord. We proclaim the gospel, and we hope for his anticipated return, all at this table. This is a special place. And when we come to it, Paul says we better come with special attitudes. Let's see, number 3, the preparation for the Lord's Supper. We'll look quickly at this. The preparation for the Lord's Supper, verse 27. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord, anaxios, or unworthily, shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. He says, look, it's serious. It's important. If you treat this uncommon thing commonly, you become literally liable, that's the word guilty, for the body and blood of the Lord. If you come to this table wrongly, you're guilty of it. What do you mean unworthily, John? Well, I'll tell you how you can come unworthily. The Corinthians did it. You can come, here's the way you can treat the table of the Lord unworthily. Number 1, by ignoring it rather than obeying it. By just not doing it. You're saying it's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. It's unimportant. Is that right? No, it's wrong. That's unworthy of you and unworthy of him. Second, you can treat the table unworthily by making it a performance rather than something meaningful. By just doing it rather than understanding it. I'll tell you another way you can pervert.
Like that. He's not supposed to do this. You can't do that. That's not how this works. At the same time that they're thinking this, the debris is still falling through the ceiling from where 4 rednecks, I'm using my imagination about what kind of guys would have done this, have just moved through every excuse. Now this is a true statement. See if God's Spirit verifies what I'm about to say to you. If this man would have been dependent on a lot of us, the moment we would have seen the crowd, he would have gone back home the exact same way he came. I promise you, most of us, I don't want to say most of us, I don't want to talk about you. For me, I'm really quick to give up and assume something isn't God's will when I can't immediately see a way in. And so now we're in a passage where these scribes, these teachers of the law, who have preserved the identity of God's people, they weren't villains. Really, they were heroes. But what happened over time was the oral tradition became more important than the truth. Did you ever play the telephone game? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where I tell you something and you tell them something, and by the time it gets all the way around, everybody has rabies and everybody's gonna die, and it's a crazy thing when it gets passed down. And the thing about Jesus that maybe doesn't always get mentioned when we preach about him is that he reveals to us that our God is a confrontational God. God is confrontational. And Your first thought about that might be, no, God is a comforter. He's a good father. It's who he is, Stephen. It's who he is. It's who he is. And he is. One scripture says that he comforts us with the comfort so we can comfort others with the same comfort by which we've been comforted. The Bible also says that God comforts the downcast. That's something that Paul said when he was going through a lot of conflicts. He does comfort the downcast. He speaks words of reassurance to you when everybody else is speaking words of condemnation to you. Be sure of it. But the same God that comforts the downcast also confronts the dysfunctional. And he loves you too much to leave you in something that is limiting you. He's a confrontational God. I know that thinking of God as confrontational may violate our perception of him as it was handed down to us, but God is very confrontational, right? God will get up in the face of anything that will keep you from being all that he created you to be. Now, before you take this as permission to just like go off on somebody and say you're being like Jesus, that's not the point of this lesson. The point of the lesson is for you to realize that God will break through any of the beliefs that you've developed about you, about him, or about others. He's not scared to do that. So if it means going to Pharaoh and saying, let my people go, and he has to send frogs and turn the Nile into blood, and if God has to send flies and locusts and plagues, even if God has to kill off the firstborn of Egypt, he will see to it that his people are really free because he's a confrontational God. If it means he has to put you in a lion's den and shut the mouth of the lion to show Nebuchadnezzar that he is the great God and there is none above him, he'll do that. He's not a conflict avoiding God. And a lot of us never experience the growth because we will never face the conflict. One thing I love about Holly is when that switch flips and she turns from sweet Holly, Mrs. Better Half Holly, smiling Holly that y'all know and love and subscribe to her book club. But Holly, let me tell you something about Holly. Let me tell you a story about Holly. The other day, she was on, this was right at Christmas time, she was on with customer service. She is the most polite person. She's not nasty. She's not mean. She's balanced. She's even. She can diffuse. But at a certain point, I know y'all have a perspective of Holly, right? She's just so, and she is, usually. On this phone call, the lady, the customer service rep, wouldn't put her through to a supervisor, right? And so I don't know what Holly said, but at some point the lady said, ma'am, I'm gonna go ahead and transfer you to escalations. And Holly said, that's exactly where you need to put me, is escalations. That's the place for me, is escalations. Escalate me. Holly said that. Holly, I'm like, who are you? I know you, but I don't know you. Because when something got in her way, now, she's gonna try it the nice way and everything like that. But there comes a time, now listen, it's okay sometimes for you to have that nice, gentle kind of faith about things in your life, right? It's a time just to be like nice and okay, I'm just gonna wait and see how this turns out. But when something really matters to God's heart and your heart, this is what I'm trying to say. There comes a time to escalate. There comes a time when people can't do it for you. So you have got to go above the people and go to the one who has all authority, all power. Aren't you glad that God's power doesn't need people's permission to operate? That if God decides to use you in a certain way, you can speak to the supervisor. If people aren't treating you good, you can go to your father and say, you see how they're treating me? You see how their situation is? You see how I'm trying? Would you please get involved before I lose my mind and do something I'm gonna regret? God will step in. God will confront it. God will tell Pharaoh. God has a mighty hand. God has an outstretched arm. God said, I've seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I'm coming down there. Not everybody likes this kind of preaching. It's not comfortable. But when you have an addiction that's robbing you of the daylight of your life, yeah. So as the conflict is escalating, this is one of 5 stories in Mark's gospel that's showing us the confrontational nature of God. And it's an interesting one because I'll point out a few things to you. When Jesus is arguing with the scribes about the Sabbath, they ask him, why are you breaking the Sabbath, right? And he's trying.
I haven't had any meat for 40 days, but I'm giving the protein to you. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. And you see, it's important that you know that he set it on fire. Because when you set something on fire, you can't take it back. When you set it on fire, you can't reach in and get it. You can't give it to God and take it back, and give it to God and take it back, and give it to God and take it back. Away with all these people talking about, I gave it to the Lord. No, you didn't. You took it back in the car. You took it back in your house. You took it back. When you give something to God, you put it in the fire. But none of that is what drove me to the text. It was that when he put the sacrifice on the altar on earth, that God smelled it in heaven. And the whole story is about when God smells honor. And I'm gonna prove it to you. Wait a minute, I'm gonna prove it to you. The last verse in Genesis 8:22 that we quote all the time, it's not God's words. While the earth remaineth, there will always be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, all that. That's not God's words. It was God's thoughts. The Bible says that when he smelled the sacrifice, that God said to himself, when he looked down there and he saw Noah on his knees and he smelt the first meat go to him, he said, no matter how wicked they get, I'm not going to do that anymore. While the earth remaineth, there will always be seed time and harvest. Day and night, cold and heat. There are some things I will never take you through again. because I smell honor. Later, he would tell Moses, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be longer upon the earth which the Lord thy God giveth thee. When God smells honor, I'm gonna stop. We got a lot of church people that come to church, and we got a lot of people who come to service. But out of this great crowd of people, we got a few folks that offer up a sacrifice and really give God honor. And if there's anybody out there under the sound of my voice who's got something to be thankful for, don't wait on nobody else around you, because most people won't do it. But build you an altar and offer you a sacrifice and get in the presence of your God and stumble up to him and give him the honor and the glory. If he brought you through anything, if he brought you out of something you thought you couldn't get out of, if he healed your body, if he renewed your mind, if he brought your child through something, then get to that altar and give God up. Because when God smells honor, real worship is a smoky business. It's a heart set on fire. It's a mind looking to God. When God smells honor, he smells it in tears and praise and honor and sacrifice. And your praise is going up before the throne as smoke before God. And when God smells honor, he gives promises. When God smells honor, he gives promises. When God smells honor, oh, keep on coming to church all you want to. That ain't gonna do nothing. When God smells honor, God smells honor. Mama, when God smells honor. Young man, when God smells honor. He doesn't care about what you have or what you drive or what you own until God smells honor. When God smells honor. He'll make a decision.
You know, we're going to get into some more of this because there was several points when I was listening to the State of the Union address that I want to ask somebody point blank about some specific things. We'll be back, everybody. We're here with our special guest this morning, the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris. We'll be right back. More Steve Harvey Morning Show right after this.
You're listening to the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
All right, everybody. We're back, and our special guest this morning is our Vice President of the United States, our 49th Vice President, the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris. And we're talking about the State of the Union address. I was complimenting her about President Biden's whole persona that he had the night on that evening. I was asking her take on it. He pointed out something in the thing. He said that you were very important in some of his causes with small business. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. As you know, Steve, I was born in Oakland, California. I was raised, my sister and I, by our mother, who worked long days and weekends. And then two doors down, Our second mother was Miss Shelton, who was part of that whole exodus of black folks from the South who went to California. So she was from Louisiana. Her husband was from Arkansas. And Miss Shelton was a small business owner. She owned the nursery school where we lived on top of the nursery school in the apartment. That's where we grew up. And she was the second mother to us. When my mother worked late, we walked 2 doors down and grew up there as much as we did at home. And Miss Shelton not only was she a business owner and a leader in that way, she was a civic leader. She was a community leader. She would hire from the community. She would mentor and train. She would console the local mothers. And when I think about who our small business owners are, and I've been traveling the country meeting with them for years, that's who they are. They're the ones who will, man or woman, will be the ones who sponsor the local softball league, who will mentor the young people in the community, who are part of the civic and the cultural fabric, not to mention the economic fabric of the community. And as it turns out, half of America's workforce works for a small business or owns a small business. So you're also talking about a lot of people. So the work that I've been doing, I did it when I was in the Senate and now as vice president, has been to increase access to capital for small business owners. Because we have so many people in the community who have a good idea, but they don't necessarily have access to the capital to start or grow a small business. I can't tell you the number of small business owners who told me when they first went to a big bank with their idea, they heard a word they'd never heard before. They were told they were unbankable. But then they went to the community bank, led by community leaders who know the community, who know what the community wants and needs. And so that is the work I've been doing, which is bringing money, billions of dollars, through our administration to the community banks. I've been encouraging the private sector, so Google and some of the big banks, to also put capital investment into the community banks, who then give that money into the community to our small businesses and also help them with financial literacy.
Hey, everybody, just sit tight. We'll be right back. We're talking with the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris, and we'll be right back with more on the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
You're listening to the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
All right, everybody, we're back, and our special guest this morning is the 49th Vice President of the United States, first female Vice President of the United States. It's the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris.
So here's the thing, Steve. We have made a commitment, President Biden and our administration, we're going to increase by 50% the number of federal contracts that go to minority-owned businesses. So you see the math on that then. Let's put more resources into the community banks, create more access to capital for people in the community, also knowing that we're going to be putting more money into manufacturing, construction, the kinds of businesses that will get the job done of building back up our infrastructure. So let's create that ecosystem where everyone has equal opportunity, right, to thrive economically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent. You know, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions.
Okay.
The last question is a personal question.
Okay.
But this question right here is about a part of last night. You know, this country, after the last administration, to me, became more divided than ever before because of, I just saw something in this country I've never seen. I'm 66 years old. I've seen it. And I've always been a voter. So I've watched it go down. America has always been known as one of the powers of, even in the soft industries like sports and movies and TV and all of this, brands, education. But it's kind of taken a hit lately with the gun violence, with the racial violence, with the January 6th incident. What does it look hopeful from you guys' side of the administration? How do we work with the other side? I just hate it when I see one side standing up clapping and the other side sitting there on their hands. Yeah. But then for a whole group of people, it makes no damn sense at all. Yeah. I'm stunned about that. How are you all?
Levitations, vomiting, strange voices. Have you ever wondered if the stories about exorcism are true?
He definitely has something going on. It's primal.
And if they are true, how could one protect themselves from these dark forces?
Hold still, Linda.
Charlie.
That thing is back.
I see it.
These are the questions we posed to renowned exorcist Father Carlos Martins, who agreed to open his case files to the public for the first time.
Tell me who you are.
The one you won't get out. The one you can't.
My name is Father Carlos Martins. I am an exorcist. I have seen things.
473, dwell with me.
Very evil things.
No life without death!
Things that I wish weren't true.
Oh, God! Protect me!
Forget what you think you know about exorcism. Listen to The Exorcist Files on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's 1967, the Cold War, and Joseph Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, the Princess of the Kremlin, has just fled Mother Russia. Her new home? A place where the roads are paved with gold and people bake apple pies out of baseballs and freedom. A place called America.
Hello to everybody. I am very happy to be here.
That story alone would be worthy of a podcast. But this one, Svetlana, is about what comes next. And it's the craziest story I've ever heard. It has KGB agents, mystics, and a Frank Lloyd Wright commune, destiny, immortality, and unbreakable cycles, weird sex stuff, weird money stuff, weird dances, 3 Olgas, 2 Svetlanas, and 1 neurotic gay playwright who won't shut up about it all. Guess which one I am? Listen to Svetlana on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Paper Ghosts is a true crime podcast investigating the mysterious disappearance and brutal, unsolved murder of Tammy Zawicki.
They just kept telling us from the beginning, she'll be back, she'll be back.
It is the very essence of our national character. Every generation of Americans needs to know that freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. That's a lovely phrase, that, to have the right to do what we ought, right? So that's such an interesting twist on what freedom means, and it is very much akin to this idea that God frees the Israelites so that they can serve the highest purpose in the desert. And you think, well, what in the wilderness? Well, the wilderness is the wilderness of the soul, obviously, in despair and catastrophe. That's the wilderness in exile. You want to serve what's highest in that situation, because that's the way through. That's the Exodus, because Exodus means ex hodos, which means way forward. The way forward out of the desert and out of the tyranny is by the adoption of the highest possible level of responsibility. And that's the right to adopt that responsibility is there for the, sine qua non, is that the right word? Of freedom, not the freedom to engage in hedonistic excess, which isn't a freedom at all. It's just self-destructive. You know, psychopaths, they don't learn from experience. They're really hard on their future selves. They have to move from locale to locale because everybody figures them out. Like, they betray themselves just exactly and as badly with their hedonistic pursuit of power and licentiousness. They betray themselves just as badly as they betray everyone else. And the clinical literature on that is crystal clear.
And some of them are in politics. But that quote's important because it gets to the idea of ordered liberty, which is fundamental to the American sense of freedom. And I think we've fleshed that out pretty well at this point. Freedom has a deeper meaning than just hedonistic pleasures and short-term gratification. And the American experiment is fundamental to this idea of ordered liberty. I always point to the Statue of Liberty as some good symbolism for this, because she holds her torch, which is supposed to illuminate the path towards freedom, but nobody really sees what she has in her other hand, which is a tabula ansara. It's a book of law. And inscribed on that book of law is our Independence Day, July 4th, 1776. And that's interesting. I think that symbolism is interesting because, one, it's a book of law. So it is this idea that you can't really have freedom unless there's some sense of law here. Because if you have anarchy, of course, the natural extreme there is anarchy, and hard to be truly free in anarchy because there's a high likelihood that stronger people will just infringe on your rights and destroy you and end up in this sort of post-apocalyptic warlord scenario. But authoritarianism is, of course, the other end of that, in which you clearly don't have freedom either. And so ordered liberty, in this in this social contract where people agree to live by some sense of moral standards. And then the question is, where do we get those moral standards from? And I think that's why we put "in God we trust," those words, on everything from our coins to our dollar bills to inscribed right above the chair of the Speaker of the House.
Oh, no, an ordered liberty, a walled garden is ordered liberty. And that's a standard image of paradise. It has to be culture, that's the walls, right? And then it has to be freedom, natural freedom even within, but it has to be balanced and it has to be balanced in a way that signifies the deepest possible meaning. Because that's another thing that's very interesting psychologically is what's the phenomenology of getting the balance between order and chaos right, or between law and freedom, let's say. And I know the answer to that. The answer is meaning, because that's what meaning signifies. So when you're gripped by that sense of meaning, this is literally the case. When you're gripped by that sense of meaning, what your nervous system is signaling to you from the lowest depths is that you're somewhere secure enough so you don't have to be panicking, but on the edge enough so that you're maximally learning. And so you're benefiting from the walls and the rules. That's the predictability. But then you extend yourself out into the unknown. And when you do that enough, your interest intensifies and your attention intensifies and your engagement in life intensifies. And if you do that maximally, well, then you're on the line between yin and yang, right? Hey, Jonathan Pajot told me something very interesting about this. It's so cool. This just blew me into bits when I heard it. You know, when the Israelites are going out of Egypt into the desert after the Red Sea, God appears to them as a column of fire at night and a column of cloud during the day. And I asked Pajot what that meant because I couldn't quite figure it out. And he said, well, it's the same thing as the yin and yang. Is the column of fire is light in the darkness and the column of cloud is darkness in the light. It's shade and the provision of what would you call it? Protection from the sun when it's too bright. And then at night, the fire is what lights your way. And so you have these two pillars. They're just like the two circles in the yin and yang. And if you're guided by the light at night and the darkness during the day, balanced in proper proportions, then you're on God's path out of the tyranny in the desert. It just blew me away because right there you have the union of the Taoist philosophy and the Judeo-Christian philosophy in a single dramatic image. It's absolutely spectacular. That was like one of 100 things I learned at this seminar. But that's so cool, eh? If imagine if that was really the case, is that, you know, when you're suffering and miserable, there's a potential pathway of meaning that beckons forward, even in the depths of that misery. And that's, if you can find that, it literally means you found the pathway out. And that's the pathway that's marked by the proper balance between predictability and unpredictability and law and spirit and structure and fire and tree and snake, all of those opposites. They all line up, and then that imbues you with the sense that your life is worth it, that existence is worth it despite the suffering and the malevolence. It's phenomenal, man. It's phenomenal, literally phenomenal. Yeah.
And it's the balance of politics too, or at least it should be. I mean, what we should be arguing about when we argue in politics is this balance between chaos and order, and this balance between too much order and too much government control. Based in this idea that the government can create this utopia for people, based on this idea that the government might even know what utopia is for everyone, right? And that's the amount of hubris involved in that presumption is enormous. And on the other side, this idea that, well, you should just let everyone be free and hedonistic or anarchic in a sense. And of course, the balance is the right place for that. If I write another book, I think it would be about defining this philosophy of freedom and how we think about it and how best to obtain it. Maybe that would be a good place, a good direction to go. But fundamentally, it's Thomas Sowell's conflict of visions, the unconstrained versus the constrained vision. This unconstrained vision being that there is no limit to what government can accomplish if we just do it together and we just want the nice things. Okay, that's the unconstrained vision. And the constrained vision is a little bit more humility about what we think government can accomplish to make your life better, to help you pursue your own happiness. And so the conservative angle on this is, have a sense of gratitude for institutions that existed before us.
Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and you're listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, where we encounter God's voice and live life through the lens of Scripture. The Bible in a Year podcast is brought to you by Ascension. Using the Great Adventure Bible timeline, we'll read all the way from Genesis to Revelation, discovering how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story today. Today is day 151, day 151. We're reading 1 Kings chapter 9 and then 2 chapters out of Ecclesiastes, chapters 6 and 7. We're also praying Psalm 7. If you're interested, the Bible translation that I'm reading from is the Revised Standard Version, the Second Catholic Edition. I'm using the Great Adventure Bible from Ascension. Also, you can download your own Bible in a Year reading plan by visiting ascensionpress.com/Bible in a Year. You can also subscribe to this podcast to receive daily episodes every single day for 365 days. As I said, it is day 151. We're reading 1 Kings 9, which is going to sound like yesterday, like a review of 2 Chronicles, because it is. It's a review of the other things that Solomon has done, and specifically the Lord's second appearance to Solomon we're going to hear about, as well as diving more deeply into Ecclesiastes and this incredible, incredible wisdom book where Koheleth, the preacher, examines what is the goodness of life and what should I set my heart on and what is it dangerous to set your heart on. That is today, 1 Kings 9, Ecclesiastes 6 and 7, and then praying Psalm 7. The first book of Kings, chapter 9, the Lord's second appearance to Solomon. When Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication, which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house which you have built, and put my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And as for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, saying, there shall not fail you a man upon the throne of Israel. But if you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them. And the house which I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods, and worshipped them, and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this evil upon them. At the end of 20 years, in which Solomon had built the 2 houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, and Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber and gold, as much as he desired, King Solomon gave to Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, they did not please him. Therefore he said, what kind of cities are these which you have given me, my brother? So they are called the land of Kabul to this day. Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Other works of Solomon. And this is the account of the forced labor which Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord and his own house, and the Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer, and burnt it with fire, and had slain the Canaanites who dwelt in the city, and had given it as dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer. And lower Beth-horon, and Baalath, and Tamar in the wilderness, in the land of Judah, and all the store cities that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots, and the cities for his horsemen, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. All the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the sons of Israel, their descendants who were left after them in the land, whom the sons of Israel were unable to destroy utterly, these Solomon made a forced levy of slaves, and so they are to this day. But of the sons of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. They were the soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. These were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550, who had charge of the people who carried on the work. But Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house, which Solomon had built for her. Then he built the Millo. 3 times a year Solomon used to offer up burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he had built to the Lord, burning incense before the Lord. So he finished the house. Solomon's fleet. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon, and they went to Ophir and brought from there gold to the amount of 420 talents, and they brought it to King Solomon. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 6. Frustration of desires. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy upon men. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a sore affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but he does not enjoy life's good things, and also has no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better off than he. For it comes into vanity and goes into darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice told, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to one place? All of the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool, and what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is man the better? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Chapter 7. Wisdom and folly compared. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of countenance the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of the mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. Surely oppression makes the wise man foolish, and a bribe corrupts the mind. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick to anger, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this.
And greetings, welcome to the Dividing Line on, it's sometime in March, yeah. I think it's Tuesday. And a couple of, I don't know, sometime last week, I think, I went running with my wife after dark, and I wear this headlamp thingy, and it's really bright. I mean, the technology they've come up with those things is just incredible over the past number of years. But what it did is it shows me what I'm breathing in while running or biking. And right now in Arizona, that's bad. You get shots and stuff, don't you? For 8 years. Just the air is, you could slice it. I mean, it's just filled with, you come out in the morning, your car is covered in dust and pollen and all this kind of stuff, and wow. And it's finally caught up to me. Every spring, this happens to where, and I've been tested for like valley fever and all this type of stuff, but it's just sort of I just call it my springtime asthma stuff. It makes me sound like I smoke 3 packs a day, especially after riding 50 miles or something like
Yeah,
that.
my allergist diagnosed me that I am allergic to the southwestern portion of the United States of America. That's what he said.
By the way, pretty impressed with what I did before coming in today.
I was working. I missed it. What?
How could you have missed the Babylon
I saw
Bee,
you there,
which, by the way, Babylon Bee has been shown to have a higher truth content than Breitbart News.
Ow, ow, ow.
Yes, the Babylon Bee this morning reporting on my circumnavigation of the globe in less than 4 hours, which that's that. Let me tell you something. Wind's going by that fast. It flaps and it's bad. Anyway, that would be nice. To say 3 hours 54 minutes. That would give me really meaningfully about depending on whether I'm climbing or just what somewhere around 78 miles, maybe 75, 78, not including stops and things like that. So not quite 24,000 something, but I am on my 5th time around the planet though. But that's lifetime. So anyway, if I have to stop and cough and stuff like that, I feel fine, feel great. It's just this stuff that will be bothering me till sometime in May when it gets hot enough that for some reason it stops. I don't know why it is, but it's the infirmities of the flesh, shall we say. Anyway, I have some books piled up over here, and normally I don't have a bunch of books piled up over here. But here, for example, is a book by Mark Goodacre, Thomas and the Gospels, the case for Thomas's familiarity with the Synoptic Gospels. And then another book, fairly recent, Simon Gathercole's The Composition of the Gospel of Thomas. And I likewise have here volume 2. I think there's 5 volumes in this set that I have, called the Coptic Gnostic Library, a complete edition of the Nag Hammadi codices. And I'm very thankful to have this. I'll be reading from this today on the Gospel of Thomas. And then it's not directly relevant to Thomas, but there are a lot of people finding this rather interesting. You might find this book that came out, I think, last year. Last year. Baylor University Press, Christian Oxyrhynchus, Text, Documents, and Sources by Blumwell and Waymont. It is good to have particular resources available, especially when you're dealing with the utilization of these sources by the enemies of the faith and stuff like that. So I'm not, there's probably no reason for most Christians to have the Coptic Gnostic Library laying around, but it will be useful for us for the reason that I want to read today the Gospel of Thomas. Now, if I have time, if I can remember to do so, I'll see. Actually, maybe someone in the listening audience could do this for me. I forget what year it was. It was sometime either late 90s or early part of this century. I wrote an article for the CRI Journal on the Gospel of Thomas, its background, stuff like that. Just sort of an introductory thing. It wasn't overly in-depth, just, familiarizing people with it. And I would assume that that's available now online, because I know my Whatever Happened in Nicaea thing is available. So maybe that is too. Maybe someone can pull that up and let me know, and at least I can throw it into the link it to the blog entry for this. But the materials we've read to this point in story time with Grandpa Jimmy, as people have come to view it, we read the Proto-Evangelium of James, and yeah, there's some weird stuff in it, and you can sort of hear the echoes of Gnostic sources. By the way, I did see Young Messiah over the weekend. I wrote up just that night, wrote up a real quick review of it. And I think some people were upset with me that I didn't just rip its lips off. But it was obvious that they attempted to de-Gnosticize it. You just can't be 100% successful when the sources that you're sort of basing stuff on were Gnostic in the first place, but the attempt was made. It wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be because of the trailer where Jesus is opening his hand and the bird flies out. I figured that was the beginning story from the infancy gospel of Thomas that we read last time. It wasn't. Jesus had found a dead